Welcome to Braindrop by VCOM Solutions. Every episode, we talk to IT leaders and experts, explore recent projects, and learn from their triumphs and challenges. We hope today's episode provides you with a unique window into the world of IT, where creativity meets problem solving and technology drives businesses forward. I'm your host, Jethro Castillo. Let's drop into today's conversation. Today on Braindrop by VCOM Solutions, I am joined by David Williamson, the CIO of Abzena, an end-to-end contract development and manufacturing organization for antibody drug conjugates and complex biologic molecules in the biopharmaceutical industry. David Williamson has over 25 years of experience in life science and has spent the last 10 years or so innovating and transforming data management and technology programs at global biotech companies, building strategies to drive enterprise business value and efficiency. David, hello.
Hello, welcome.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great today. Glad to be on here. Thank you for having me.
How long have you been at Abzena?
Just up on 2.5 years, and so been enjoying it. It's a dynamic place. We get involved with large biopharmaceutical companies down to your small 3 scientists in a lab, trying to drive forward a new therapy for primarily for unmet needs.
And how many team members does your team have?
So I have 18 team members globally. We do have third parties, MSP and others that we work with also.
And ultimately, how many employees rely on this team?
So we have around 530 employees, and then probably another 150, 200 contractors that we support.
Gotcha. So 18 members to kind of support quite a number of people for sure.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
We talked about this before the podcast started, but the IT world is rapidly evolving and changing. And so with all the information out there, where do you go to learn, grow, and keep up to date?
Yeah, so I think your professional network is always critical. So meeting people through LinkedIn, through professional organizations. I spend time with the Society of Information Management, or SIM. I've found that very valuable, where I'm interacting with my peers, both in industry and in other industries. There's some other forums like Captive 8, the number 8, that have been very useful, not only to network with my fellow IT leaders, but also to get introduced to new solutions, new vendors, especially those up and coming that are still, say, venture capital funded.
And with all this information that you're taking in, what are your thoughts on the current state of IT?
Well, you summarized it well. It's always changing. It's always evolving. There's always a push to empower self-service, empower the individual. You see that a lot with things like ChatGPT, where now you don't need to go talk to IT. You can do it yourself. I think that trend is just, it's going to continue. It's going to continue to be a critical part of how does IT deliver support services like that, but doing so in a secure way. I think the more dark trend is around cybersecurity, ransomware, and then also those bad characters utilizing these technologies to make our life even more difficult and securing.
Yeah, that's always the nature of technology, right? It moves so fast and it does so many good things, but technology itself is kind of neutral, and it just depends who uses it, how it's used, and how it's kind of protected. And I think that's kind of general, but is there anything specifically in your industry? And correct me if I'm wrong, is it accurate to say you're part of the biopharmaceutical industry?
Yes, that's accurate. Well, I think you always hear globally around drug prices and why is it taking so long for this therapy to get to patients? Why can't we do these things faster? Why can't we understand the side effects better versus just like we used to decades ago, just essentially experiment, release the medicine, the therapy, and then see kind of what ill effects may come up. So we at Abzena try to do that. That's our motto, is to accelerate medicine to get to the patients, to help our partners move their therapies forward. And doing that in driving consistency of the manufacturing laboratory processes, driving our understanding of the underlying processes. What are the parameters that matter? How can we control them? and therefore driving a very consistent, reliable, high quality product out to our clients, which then means ultimately to patients.
Abzena has put themselves into a role that has a gigantic responsibility. And you mentioned, you were pushing medicine, especially in places where the needs are unmet. And so, with all of that being said, what keeps you up at night?
Well, I think the regulators globally have recognized the importance of what's called data integrity. So having a near perfect confidence that the data that came off the laboratory instrument or out of manufacturing that was recorded either electronically or in a paper notebook and then reported to the regulators as part of, say, approval submission, that data is the identical to the original data that was generated. There's at least three, four or more steps in that process for that data to get to people. So how do I secure the
Sure.
data? How do I automate steps? Because as you know, whenever we introduce a human into something, there's margin for error and mistakes happen. So again, when we are pushing new therapies, very innovative therapies, we want to make sure that the data package is complete, it is accurate, and then can be evaluated properly for approval. So my concerns are all around that, which gets back to cybersecurity, gets back to
Yeah.
storage.
Yeah.
How do I manage that? And then how do I introduce automation and workflows and other tools to assist the scientists, the engineers in their job to eliminate these lower value tasks? Like you transcribing, we've all done this, like especially in college, where you're transcribing numbers into Excel, and then
Yeah.
you can do a dozen or so pretty accurately, but then your error rate starts going up. So how can we as an IT organization partner with those groups and eliminate that work and get them focused on moving forward with science?
Yeah, and especially as organizations scale, right? Maybe you're only in the beginning, you're inputting very little, sure, and the errors are low, but as you do more and more and more errors happen. And so, especially with technology kind of growing so rapidly, organizations are growing so rapidly, and you want to be able to keep up with that for sure. Yeah.
Having a scalable solution is critical. It is, as you said, very easy to do something once or twice, but making it repetitive, making it have you having a high level of confidence that it's repeatable and you will get the same result every time. That takes effort. It
Right.
takes understanding of what the underlying process actually is.
Right, exactly. Well, so what was a recent project that your team completed? I know you've been there for 2.5 years.
Yeah, so we focused on when I first arrived in implementing a new ERP system. We got that up and stable, and now we're generating a lot of information within our ERP system, whether it's around materials or client projects, production schedules. And so then the business is there. I want access to the data, I want to use the data. And like most organizations, they turn to things like Microsoft Excel, the pivot tables,
Right.
writing their own scripts to get the data. So my team and I investigated different solutions to initially enable data access and some data transformation, but getting them again, similar to what I just talked about, automating the process of getting the information to them. So they're not spending 70% of their time just getting the data ready. They're spending 70% of their time actually analyzing the data, driving decisions, making actions on it. So we started on that journey back in early May, and have gotten a lot of success out of it over these 3 or so months in doing exactly what I talked about for the financial planning and analysis group, automating their data, dumping it in initially in Excel. Now we're exploring moving it to Power BI
Sure.
dashboards, doing similar things for the supply chain organization and other groups. And it's been highly successful. And then you have the downside of success that now your work queue and the requests that are exceeding our capacity to meet them, but that's always a great problem to have.
Sure.
So that's one project we've done this year that has really helped the business be more successful. So highly skilled people who were expending a day and a half a week moving data around. And now it just happens. It runs
Right.
on a schedule. They have access. The tool has the ability to dump it directly into a dashboard, force a refresh of the dashboard. So now we're excited about moving into the next step where at the meeting we're not talking about a spreadsheet or PowerPoint
Right.
slides. We're
Right.
using the dashboards, and that's
Right.
just a whole different way of working.
When you first join a company, I can imagine you probably see a lot of things that you want to fix and move forward. How do you decide, okay, I want to prioritize this project, and then I want to design it this way and procure it this way? How do you know where to start and how do you get that buy-in too?
Yeah, so I think at the CIO level, you're primarily interacting with the executive leadership. They're thinking strategy, they're thinking 6 months out. So you have a lot of big idea generation, and you create a vision of where you would like to be in 18 months, 3 years down the road. But the reality is, then a week later, something breaks, and then all the action and
Yeah.
discussion is about the thing that broke. So you can't forget about the day to day. What I spent my time initially in Abzena was understanding what was working. How well were we providing the basic services of emails, Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, etc.? Where were there opportunities or things that people weren't satisfied with? Being a global organization, providing full coverage from a help desk in all time zones is not inexpensive. It's resource heavy. So things of that nature that came up, but always trying to focus on what can I do to help today's problems, but also
Mm,
it's in line and moving us forward with the bigger picture.
right.
So I think that sort of balancing act is the biggest challenge that you have as a senior leader is how do I want to balance my efforts on the strategy versus the operational. And so I think my actions on that is understand where we're the weakest operationally and trying to close those gaps, empowering my direct reports to take action and make decisions on their own. They're the closest to the problem. So I think that's also a big part of being a leader is to get out of the way and clear out
Sure.
bureaucracy and other hurdles for
Sure.
people so they can be successful. And and that also can create the good news, bad news of things are working well. So people then minimize the complexity and the effort that went into getting it to work well to um, the sort of good news of that, well, things work well. You take we take our iPhones and cell phones for granted, but
Yeah.
there's a massive amount of complexity for them to be the companies to be able to deliver that service and have it work as well.
Sure.
So sort of to bring this back is optimally at my level, I'm spending the majority of my time on the bigger picture and how do we want to progress our technology roadmaps, working with the senior business leaders to partner with them on how can I help you solve your problems? How can I make you more efficient, more effective in
Right.
what you're trying to accomplish? And enabling my direct reports to manage the day to day activities and help me look for where are opportunities that we
Sure.
can improve.
Right. All right. So that was big picture. Let's go back to the project that you brought up. What was your
Sure.
process when it came to, you come up with the project? You're like, all right, how did you then go about designing it and procuring it?
I start with identifying two or three key business stakeholders. So if it's IT messaging system or something, maybe the stakeholders are in IT. But in this particular example, the stakeholders were in finance, supply chain, different parts of the business. and trying to then document in it briefly. What are the use cases? What would good look like if we were
Mm,
successful with the project? What could I look at that would be different, or what would be different in my typical day? And describing that, documenting it, so we can go back and say, did we achieve this? Can I see this difference now? And then we looked at what are the vendors, what are organizations like Gartner's recommending to do in this area. So we initially started looking at data warehouses and how could we build out a data warehouse? What tools would we need? And leveraging the vendors and other organizations to educate ourselves, and then trying to wean that down to say 2 to 4 different solutions that we wanted to go into more detail with.
sure, sure. The whole project itself, how long was the project from beginning to end? How long did it take to go live?
Well, at this point, we're about 6 months in. I think this one is going to run in perpetuity,
Yeah,
as in you solve this group of issues, and then we go on and solve more. That's been part of our preliminary budget discussions for next year. So, what's the staffing to support this? Now that we've created a demand, how can
sure.
we
Right,
stay on top of it?
right,
So I think that's also to your comments about the technology. Is the technology is improved, your ability to implement it, and and the speed and flexibility in which you could do that is greatly increased also.
right,
So that was key criteria for us when we were looking at the vendors: is how quickly could we get running? How quickly could we do some form of proof of concept so we could learn and we could adjust? That's the idea of the early 2000s IT project of give me money and people and I'll see you in 18 months just doesn't work.
yeah.
The business has changed, the world's changed so much in 18 months. Whatever you built isn't going to be very useful.
Right. Designing, procuring, the whole beginning stage of it all. What were some things that went really well when you were diving into this?
Well, I think the excitement and energy from our business partners was very high. Their interest in us moving forward with the project was high, and that's helpful. It energizes my own team.
Sure.
The vendors see that also, so they're excited about trying to work with
Right,
you.
right.
This was it was clear with their availability that it was a priority, so that worked really well. I think what didn't work so well is when you started getting into the actual solutions, there was different approaches that could be complementary, but not necessarily. And so us trying to understand, well, which approach do we want to take? And of course, then there's a bit of risk.
Sure.
And the more tried and true solutions were would have taken longer if we had followed that path.
So there's always almost like a compromise that you have to make when you're choosing the solutions and you just have to ride with it, right?
Yes, I don't think there exists anything that's perfect, and you have to try to understand where is it not meeting my needs, and are those critical
Yeah.
needs? So meaning I need to look at something else, or are those more nice to have?
Yeah.
And I think we were lucky too, is often you have business partners who are also educated on the technology and they want to dive into the details. But in this particular case, the partners had the confidence in myself and my team to you make the decision, you deploy it, just deliver the results that we're looking for.
I love that you brought that up because a huge part of it is going, okay, you can't have everything you want. So you actually have to triage and
Right.
prioritize your own needs and go, all right, those things we don't need would be nice to have it, but these things we really, really, really do. And it's keeping that in
Right.
mind, always front of mind before you decide to jump into a solution or choose a solution.
And then that folds into, even for the needs you're confident you can meet, you've got a queue and prioritizing who am I going to start with and how far are we going to progress with that one group before we try to work with the different groups.
Right.
So priority governance is
Yeah.
always critical over any activity we always have too many meetings on our schedule, but getting the key stakeholders
Yeah,
together on a regular cadence is important because the day to day can often distract them. And then they're like, oh, well, what was happening? I haven't heard anything lately. So you don't want to
right,
wind up in that situation.
right. So it's priority governance, but then it's also proper and effective communication, and it's almost over communication. And even if you think it's inefficient, you kind of have to because everybody has so many things going on that you kind of have to make sure everybody's on the same page as often as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, in my experience, at least 80% of the challenges, issues I've run into, the communication was a big part of it, or lack of communication. I think also the change management around
Mm,
it. So having people understand how, if the objective is to eliminate tasks, like having people understand why we're doing this, how it's
yeah,
going to work, engaging them in testing of the solution if they, and so can't beat having end users trying to it being involved in the testing. So that I think is another critical element that gets overlooked. And change management sometimes is considered, well, that's just training. Like if I have a user
yeah,
manual, and it's not.
yeah.
None of us like having change happen to us. We much prefer being part of the change.
Talking about change management, right? It's one thing to know that the solution has benefits. It's another thing to actually deploy and implement it. When you actually implemented this project, did it go smoothly? Were there challenges? How did it all happen?
I think there's always challenges, and like looking at the usage of the tool, it was pretty flatlined for the first 2 months, and it's only in the last three to
Oh,
four weeks that then it just accelerated. So I think you always experience something like that, that the adoption starts off tough. It's a slog where you can have people help desk chatbots to help folks with get over that adoption, that learning curve is critical. It just that you have to communicate, train in as many different ways as you can. Not everybody learns the same way, so
right.
getting it to where it connects for you personally, so that we get you on board. I think the other thing that often gets missed in change management is, why are we doing this? That
Yeah.
happened quite a bit with our ERP rollout. As people are there, like, well, we went from this tool to a new tool. Oh, and this one's more work. Like, why do I want to spend more time doing this? And so when you explain the downstream benefits of them spending that extra time, that helps with the adoption, as an example.
You are at the top of the chain pretty much. How do you then ensure that that happens? How do you properly communicate downwards? How do you trust that whole process?
Back earlier in my career, there was some sort of hallmark or message around walking the halls. I think you have to get out of your office,
Hmm.
and you have to go visit people, and you have to look. If I go and walk through the offices and the cubes and I don't see the system up on people's screens, that kind of tells you right away, like nobody even trying to use it. Or more commonly, I see it up in certain areas, certain groups, but not others. So I think that's one of the best ways, is just go out and ask
Sure.
people, kind of like being the politician of asking people. And often, in my experience, they don't recognize who I am. They're like, oh, and I ask them, well, how's this new system going? Are you using it yet? And they give you very straight shooting feedback on it, which then, if what you don't know, you can't do much about.
I love that you say that because I think in an ideal world, you would wish that like the feedback would be proactive. They would be like, or the questions would be proactive, and everybody would be like, "I need help here. I don't understand here." But probably it's more realistic for you to have to go out there and see what's happening and be the person who actually pushes that change and encourages that change,
Yes, yeah,
which is, you know,
you have to try to be visible, whether it's through, um, IM meetings in person. To your communication comment, always whatever multiple avenues to try to reach out to people. We made some changes in a third system the other week, and we've been doing the in-person thing this week. And but you still find 80% of the interactions are through chat. The
Right.
feedback's been, oh, I'm so glad that we have folks on site and walking around, even though it really doesn't look like it made a difference, but it definitely mentally is impacted people positively.
Yeah. So you mentioned that the first 2 months ish, it was like kind of, well, I don't know how long, but it kind of
Mhm.
flatlined and then it kind of got that shoot up in adoption. Everyone was using it. How do you measure? Maybe one way to measure the success of this project is just the adoption of it, but how else do you measure the impact of this project on your, I mean, we've taught, you've mentioned the goals and it's very obvious in the sense that it speeds a lot of things up, but how do you measure that?
Yeah, it's difficult to specifically measure it because I'm coming to you. Told me you spend a day and a half doing this. Now you say like, oh, I'm under an hour. So that anecdotal evidence is helpful, especially if it's coming from another leader or senior leader. But also just looking, to me, the ultimate success is the spreadsheets are gone, the PowerPoint slides are gone. We're just going to sit
Yeah.
down and pull up the dashboards or the other analytics tools we've deployed, and then we'll start the conversation with that. Then I know you're not spending any time preparing for the discussion because we just started it. And the free flow of information. So if the CEO is going to the meeting and using the materials prepared for the meeting, but now you see him or her accessing the dashboards or and using the tools, then again you know you've really moved beyond this sort of PowerPoint, like I'll give you a static picture of what's happening in the company.
Right. And I guess by that very nature, it always will take a lot of time for this type of project to see the results because people have to get used to it and the different way of doing a thing that they've done forever and ever and ever.
For sure.
You've mentioned this has huge positive outcomes for your operations. You just made it infinitely more scalable, more efficient. But did any challenges arise or were created from this new operations that maybe you didn't anticipate?
Well, if I have ready access to the information, then I know what the organization is doing. So as we onboard new client projects, you have to prepare, you have to order materials, you have to order supplies. We've had challenges in over ordering or making sure that we have enough on
Ah,
hand. And now that I know and I can visualize exactly what materials we have on hand, what materials are being ordered by whom, certainly you have circumstances where people feel like they're a bit called out, like, oh, well, I always would order more of this, but now you're questioning me on it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's not like my peer questioning me, it's somebody fairly high up in the organization. So again, you have those changes to how
yeah,
people view the thing, and doing so in a way that is more positive than negative, and getting those individuals on board and understanding the process and how they could use the
yeah,
tools. So instead of just
right.
ordering it like you always did, you could use the tools to see if that makes sense or not.
It always goes back to the idea of change management. You know the benefits objectively, holistically, but when it comes to the person who has to transition, the only thing that really matters to them are the benefits to them, right? And so if you go, you have to take this because it's better for the organization, it's harder to get them on board unless they're that type of person who thinks like organization first. You actually have to think and know their specific problems, their specific
Yeah.
workflows to be able to say, this could make it way better for you.
Yeah. And in that example, I don't think that was a problem that we had anticipated. But then when we engage with the individual and we educate and train them, then now you're helping helping them solve their problem. And then they also see the impact, as you mentioned, to the overall organization, and you can bring them along and then have them as a strong supporter. That learning from your peer is another powerful tool. So we talk about like train the trainer and other techniques, but if I go and help one of your peers, and then now you have another source that you could go to for assistance.
That was another thing that you kind of briefly touched on when you were walking the halls, so to speak. And you cannot possibly interact with 500 of your employees plus the other people you were working with. And so you kind of have to trust that the people you kind of help and train, that they start to spread it slowly but surely. And maybe that's why that plateau eventually hits like a critical mass, and then it just has a lot of adoption all at once because of that as a result, right?
Yeah, and there's a big difference between I know how to use the tool and I know how to do my job using the tool. And the IT folks tend to know the tools very well, but we don't know the job part. So you have to come into this. We have to work together to get that mix. And you will certainly find challenges with how you thought you could use the tool, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, we need to do something about that."
Now that the project is largely completed, and obviously you said it's in perpetuity, this is not a project that ever really ends. And you kind of answered this question a little bit, but is there anything that you wish you would have known beginning the project that you know now?
Well, I think one of our biggest hurdles moving forward is being able to deploy the dashboards in any decent rate. And we should have, I don't know, I guess you could, hindsight's 2020, but having better
Always.
foresight to have resources with that skill would have been helpful,
Uh,
because now
uh,
now
sure.
the all now the demand is, this is fantastic, but I want these other 10 dashboards, and that's sort of our big capacity constraint. So I think
Yeah,
that was part of it, and I think honestly, we could have sold and marketed it more up front. Yeah, we were
sure.
we were working with a smaller group of stakeholders. We should have been, I don't know, more proud and talked about it more up front.
But like you said before, good problem to have, I guess, right? It's not now it's like over buy-in, which is everyone's like, we want more of this, we want more of this. And now you're like, oh, whoa, now okay. We're not there yet.
Yeah,
We're not there yet either.
it's a good problem to have. It gets people excited about supporting what you're asking for funding and for resources. They're experiencing where it would make a difference. So yeah, much rather have those problems versus like, well, why did we do this sort of thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Are those the next projects on the horizon, getting those 10 dashboards for these people? Or, what are the next steps?
Well, that's part of the work stream, but now we're looking beyond that, as where now that we have this data, what else could we do with it? Where could we
Sure.
apply tools like AI on the data? How could we again continue to evolve different folks' jobs in a way that makes them more effective? And so that's
Right.
the conversation. So this is again kind of back to where we started around the strategy versus the operation. So now we've deployed an operational solution, but it jumps back into your strategy, and where can we go with this, and where could we use other technologies in conjunction with it?
Speaking of technologies, are there any tools and strategies that you used here in this project that you strongly recommend people use, other IT professionals and organizations use for their projects?
We got a lot of support from the vendor. I think that's another area that people tend to
Mm,
partnering with the vendor and enabling to um, having access to their technical staff to really help you. And I think we did a similar thing where we gave access to a lot of the folks inside. So not really a technology thing, more a people,
sure.
but And we did run into some technology issues where like we wanted to post data sets onto OneDrive and the tool didn't support that. So working with their development staff to build out those solutions. I tend to not want to internally develop my own solutions just because then I have to support it and that's not the business we're in. But I think there's more reliance on the vendor for the technology.
But I mean, if you have the experts there,
Yeah.
you might as well utilize them and use
Yeah.
them, right? And so leaning into that, right? Sure. This question kind of is unfair because we've talked about, oh, if you don't communicate and over communicate, things will literally change in less than 18 months, 12 months, 6 months. I'm asking you to go 5 years now, though. 5 years into the future, what are you doing and how have things changed?
Well, as much as things do change, a lot of it stays the same too. So in our industry, just this focus on the science and the engineering and those technologies will always remain strong. I see the trend more on the IT side is again this sort of broad adoption of technology becomes easier and easier. So your partnership with the business, your alignment to how you're supporting the overall organization's goals is going to become more and more critical. Because why
Sure,
do I need my own IT group when I can just go hire one if you're not doing something unique related to my business model? So I think it
sure,
becomes more critical that IT is viewed as a partner and IT is making a difference in how we're succeeding as a company. Like nobody thinks about email anymore or IM, but or a telephone if you really want to go back. So ingraining the technologies in how people work and to drive the outcomes that you want. So I think that's the biggest change, and that's why you see more engagement at the senior level, at the board of directors level with the IT leadership, because the understanding is that we can use these things. And I think that you
yeah,
see this with concerns that AI is going to replace people's jobs. I think what AI does is it becomes a requirement, a skill that people need to have. So how do I use
right,
AI? How does it help me do my job? How does it help me see things that I might have missed? So those again, I think the technology becomes more and more pervasive in ways that we would have a difficulty in imagining here. But looking back 5 years in the future, well, of course you would do that sort of thing.
yeah. That always kind of is an interesting thought to me is because, even just 5 years ago, something like Zoom wasn't even that universal, right?
Hmm.
Before COVID. And then 5, 10 years before that, the iPhone, like smartphones weren't even universal. But now it's all we know. Smartphones, Zoom, virtual communication. But that wasn't there just even a few years ago. So it makes you wonder now, especially with AI, how different it could look in 5 years. But I like how you said that what is the same still is are we able to utilize that technology to further advance and improve the efficiency and the kind of success of our organization?
Yeah, at the end of the day, biotechnology exists to cure and treat disease and maladies, and it needs to be done with consistently high quality therapies that people can uh, depend on for their lives. That we understand what side effects, if any, exist and how to manage those also. And so having that in place is critical. And a lot
Right.
of that drives back to the data and monitoring, real-time monitoring of the process of the Internet of Things and being able to um, monitor hundreds or thousands of data streams at the same time, understand what is happening, react to it. Again, remove a lot of that. I've implemented in and around using machine learning, and that will continue to grow where an algorithm can manage it much, much better than a human can. and to a
Right.
higher degree of reliability than a human would.
Well, David, thank you so much for your time. This was an absolutely incredible conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you. I enjoyed it. It was a great conversation.
Well, thank you so much and take care.
All right. Take care, man.
VCOM Solutions is here to help make your IT projects and day-to-day operations as easy and efficient as possible. If you'd like to see how VCOM can help your organization save time and money, request a demo at vcomsolutions.com/demo. Do you work in IT? Be a guest on Braindrop. Go to vcomsolutions.com/Braindrop guest to sign up. Thanks again for dropping in. Don't forget to subscribe, and you can find us on social media at VCOM Solutions. Until next time.